Previously on Manchildren of the Atom.
We were thumbing through some long boxes.
I was actually in a box in a leather suit with a mask. I hear he was also a master of the Dutch oven.
Yeah, no, he enjoyed his treats quite a bit.
A
So
couple of them were all but unclothed.
there's a lot of demonology there.
They couldn't just look up pornography back then.
Speaking of
So,
sex,
okay, yes, please.
don't worry
Do
about
not
it.
leave any grains of rice. I will be forced to count them compulsively.
End of nursery rhyme. But
We're recording this over the internet.
I do my damnedest.
Welcome to Manchildren of the Atom. We are here for our fourth episode, checking out the fourth episode of X-Men 97, Motendo / Lifedeath Part 1. I'm Matt.
I'm Bret.
And Bret, how are you doing tonight?
Not too bad, buddy. How are you doing? Is the real question.
I'm okay. My household has been dealing with COVID. I have felt better for a while, but my tests do not agree with that. So I've been working from home a lot lately.
And as with all pestilences, when you have children, it has been slowly making its way through your house.
Yeah, absolutely. And being sick when you have kids is not fun.
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's an abject nightmare.
I need that healing factor. I need that Wolverine healing factor to fast forward through this stuff.
Oh, the days I've wished I had even half of that.
Absolutely.
All right,
How about yourself? Go ahead.
No. I'm just living as best as I can live. Let's
Well,
just say
good.
that. Yeah.
Living is my favorite way to have you, Bret.
And let's hope it continues. So this one is we've talked about this a little bit in the off air show. The as much as last week's episode 3 Inferno suffered from pacing issues, this one feels like it really took the brunt of the pacing issues, maybe more so than any other episode.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and say it. I don't know if this is a spoiler for later in the discussion. This is probably the weakest episode of all 10 in this season. Kind of call that shot. It's not awful. We'll talk. There are things to like in it, but yeah, you're right. The pacing issues, it suffers with that. It suffers from being split in half, especially the second part of the narrative suffers for that. And it just doesn't quite click. It doesn't quite have the magic, but we'll talk through it in detail. And what was your opinion of it?
When I first saw it, I enjoyed but wasn't crazy about the Jubilee part. Subsequent viewings, I've watched it twice today. I actually enjoyed it a lot more. I think it's a really fun one-off individual adventure. I think it does all the things you want from those types of stories. However, the life-death end of it, and I will talk about this ad nauseum when we get to it, feels like an old school 1970s, 1980s studio chop job. Like you can see like the tape holding some of these scenes together because it feels like maybe they didn't know they were going to be limited to 10 episodes, and so they were aiming for higher than that. And then like halfway through, they were like, no, you have to have 10. And they were like, shit, we have to figure out how to cut a bunch of stuff and then make this still make sense. And I'll point out a couple points that I wrote down when we get there. Yeah. But despite that, as with every episode in the show, there are still a lot of positives.
Plenty of positives. And when I say it's the weakest in the season, I am very much grading on a curve.
Right.
Like I went through and thought about the other 9 episodes. I can't think of any that I would put this above, but that doesn't mean it's bad. If I was to compare it to the entire run, the original run, the 5 seasons of the original show,
sure,
it falls somewhere in the middle, really.
Probably, yeah. Because that Jubilee one alone, again, we'll talk about it, but it's got great pacing. It's showing you a lot of different stuff, which can feel very gimmicky, and it is kind of gimmicky, but you just get to see a lot of locations in the X-Men universe.
I like the gimmick. I like all of the times they gave us kind of pixel art style moments with these characters. That I liked. It was fun.
All right, so let's get into it then. So
we should. Yeah.
One thing I'll say, I'm not against the splitting of an episode into multiple storylines. Like I said to you a little while ago, in the I think it was the second season of the original X-Men show, pretty much every episode is like 80% that one-off episode, and the last 20%, the last 2 to 5 minutes is Xavier and Magneto in the
Yes, the
Savage
Savage
Land.
Land. Yep.
And I have very fond memories of watching that as a kid and like watching that story build. And I've gone back, a couple years ago at this point and watched a lot of those shows,
Hmm.
and it still really works as it's like an ongoing teaser for like the
It
next
is.
episode. And I think it's there's an elegance to it that unfortunately
If
is not present with this episode.
if this season had been laid out differently and we got that, if we got Storm's
Mm,
storyline and Storm and Forge's stuff played out over several weeks, small chunks, several weeks, I think it would feel a lot more organic than what we got in the back half of this one and then the upcoming one in a couple episodes.
and you know what it would also do is it would make us feel the length of her absence more.
Exactly. Yes.
Because
And
she's
and the length of their time together to build a connection. Yeah.
exactly yeah. Well, what could have been? All right, so we jump in. There's an opening scene in the kitchen here. We get more
There is.
tete-a-tete between Magneto and Gambit.
And I have a question.
Sure.
Who baked those muffins? They got a tray of muffins right there on the table. I want to know who baked those.
I mean,
Someone took their time. They knew
there's
they were
like
having a meeting.
there's a dozen muffins, and I think three different kinds. This is,
Exactly. Someone went all out.
Gambit did make the what did he make in the first
He
episode?
made beignets.
Beignets. Yes, he could just be a baker in general,
You think
making
so?
muffins as well. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So the tete-a-tete between Magneto and Gambit. Gambit is very passive in this show, which I think is interesting, because
Hmm.
he just kind of takes Magneto's shit without blowing up at him. And it's
Yeah.
weird. It's sort of similar to how Wolverine is treated, because Gambit in the comics is sort of like the new Wolverine. He's a
Hmm.
mysterious guy with an unknown background who's very cool. He smokes. He is very
He did.
hot-headed, so like when things don't go his way, he's like, I'm out of here. And yet in this
Does
uh
Gambit smoke anymore? I don't read the comics now. I want
I
to know
can't
because, like,
imagine
in the
anybody.
'90s, Gambit had a cigarette every panel. Like he's in the middle of a fight, he's got a cigarette in one hand. Wolverine, same thing with the cigars.
I can't imagine too many characters are allowed to smoke anymore in comics.
I doubt it, right?
I mean, like, we're both old men. We don't follow too closely the new stuff. But even like with movies,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the last time somebody in a mainstream movie had a cigarette. They
Oh
wouldn't
God.
let goddamn Colin Farrell as the Penguin have a cigar. That
Oh,
was like
that's
that was a big
that's rough
thing.
going.
There was like an interview where he was like, I fought mightily to have them let me smoke on screen, and the executives were like, absolutely not.
Oh my
So
God.
I'm
When we get these live action movies, is Gambit going to have a vape pen? Like what's going
Oh,
to what's going to
you know
happen
what?
here?
Don't even make it. Just
Don't speak it into the universe.
no.
Oh, but yeah, you're right. In their repartee, he definitely does take the like hanging back kind of role. He'll make a little comment here and there, but he's not like bringing it to Magneto. Magneto's just kind of sassing around the room.
Yes, he's a sassy bitch in this show. Um, we get we're introduced immediately to the idea that it is Jubilee's birthday. Tough
Hmm.
joke from Wolverine here. It's referring to Beast as a blue Rogaine ad.
Oh yeah.
Not a
I
great
mean,
joke.
does the joke play better in the '90s when this show is set?
I think it
Because
would
it
still
felt like
be
a
bad.
dated joke now.
Oh, sure. It is a very 90s, like we're talking about the not drugs. You can't really call Rogaine a drug, but like the products that were in commercials all the time. Like there were always jokes about therapists in the 90s. There were jokes about like
Oh,
the drug
shrinks.
industry. And so like this feels like
Yeah.
of a piece of those where it's just like
Yeah.
I hated it. But a much better joke is Morph
Oh my God, here we go.
busting Magneto's chops about, oh, somebody didn't get their pony when they were a kid. And he just very straight face goes, my parents perished when I was a child.
This joke is the reverse coin side of that Seinfeld joke, right? Who had a pony? I hate anyone who had a pony. I had a pony.
I've,
Do you remember that episode of
I
Seinfeld?
don't, I've watched a lot of Seinfeld, but I have not seen every episode of Seinfeld. I'm not,
Oh, okay. But yeah, somebody makes a joke about having a pony, and an older person who had bad experiences in Europe takes it very personally.
Those Europeans live such magical lives, living their horses.
Or not having their horses in Magneto's case.
Yes, no, yeah. Or it's either a dream or a nightmare for those Europeans.
But yeah, that joke does land much better.
It's very funny. We then go, Jubilee comes down and she wants to plan her birthday.
Yep.
And we get a nice little smash cut back to her room.
Yep.
And she has a killer Magneto impression.
Yes. And it's a real, the feeling of it is very much the classic X-Men Kitty Pryde, Professor Xavier is a jerk, except it's Magneto is a jerk.
It's so funny you say that, because I have in my notes here how, as a kid, I didn't really think too much about Jubilee. I was a 14-year-old boy, and so you don't think about the lady characters too often at that age.
The lady character who's meant to be like your 14-year-old self insert into the X-Men story.
Exactly. But as I've gotten older and I've read more comic books, I've come to really enjoy that role, which is first Kitty Pryde and then Jubilee. So it's funny you bring up that comparison, because I did not even consider that she is having this relationship with Magneto in the same way that Kitty Pryde had with Professor X. That's a good point.
But yeah, you're right. It's a smash. It's a well executed smash cut. You see his like kind of blank expression, and then she's mad.
and it's like you hear her voice before you see her. It's a nice little comedic moment.
It is.
That scene in the bedroom while they're chatting is also a very good window into 90s culture, because Roberto says Jubilee in a very what's the word I'm looking for here?
I wish I knew.
He's very skeptical of her when he says, "You actually play video games?"
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's a good reminder that in the 90s, video games had yet to have its totalitarian grip on our lives the way that it does now.
This is true. If you were rich and cool enough, you couldn't be bothered. You had to be just rich enough to be able to afford the games, but not like actually rich and popular.
Or you were the rich kid who had like Sega Saturn or something, like one of the fancier games, or systems rather.
Oh my gosh, that's right. But yeah, they have this back and forth, and we see on the dresser or the TV stand, whatever it is, this Motendo console with a cartridge in it that I guess I'm the one who's going to be opening up the X files at various points tonight. That cover art is extremely reminiscent of the Sega Genesis X-Men.
Yes, I thought the same thing.
Oh, so you do remember that one? You played some of them.
That was really the only one. I mean, I played the arcade because everybody played the arcade at some point. But the one that I played the most was that Sega one.
Got it. Yeah. So that was a nice little reference there. And then, boy, the 90s-ist plot of all. Oh, no, they're sucked into a video. Maybe that's 80s and 90s-ist.
Yeah, Tron is an 80s film.
Tron is an 80s film, but...
It in this plot point is brought in by the horrifying sound of what it used to sound like to connect to the internet.
The modem sound. I have a note on that. I just wrote modem sound, exclamation point. That's what Motendo actually stands for, modem sound tendo.
I read this joke online, so this is not an original joke of mine, but it's somebody on some social media site said...
Good job citing your source.
Yeah, someone on some social media site once made the joke that signing up or logging onto the internet in the 90s and hearing it just scream at you was a foreshadowing that we all should have heeded. But unfortunately, it was letting us know to turn back.
Kudos to whoever said that on the internet. We know you're definitely a listener, and we appreciate you.
Thank you for your contributions.
Go ahead and write into our email address and take credit for that joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, the modem sound singers, I'll transition into the main plot of this half of the episode. Jubilee and Roberto stuck in the video game.
So as this plays out, I really like how they've leveled up Jubilee's powers.
Agreed.
Because in the original show, it was kind of like all she could really do was like blind people, which was nice for a distraction, but she couldn't really do much. Or she would shoot it at somebody and it would like knock them over, or maybe it would like tickle. Like there's like an episode where she does it to Blob and like tickles him. And so we were constantly being reminded.
Breaks some technology, yeah.
Oh yeah, she blows up an arcade or VCR rather.
That's right.
But to now have her be a force of actual power and to have that in a show where the animations and illustrations are just of a higher quality, I think they have a lot of fun with it. I think it's a welcome change to the character.
I remember years ago seeing hints of this sometimes, and I don't know if the writers went anywhere with it, but like implications that Jubilee actually has extraordinarily strong powers, that she's basically like just creating combustion out of nothing, and it can be on like this molecular level, but that it's more of like a confidence thing. It's more of like she doesn't actually tap into her potential.
Yeah.
But if she did, she's this like, high level mutant.
And that's something that gets played with a lot, especially in the comic books, where
Iceman too, they played with that.
he becomes like an Omega level power guy. I think Gambit gets to the point where he gets very powerful.
I think, that could have happened a few times. I know there was a plot where in another reality he would have been very powerful, but in this one he had Sinister like excise a little bit of his brain matter to help him control his power instead of being like super duper powered. But again, I don't know what gets retconned. I don't know what gets run with, what gets left in the dustbin of history.
Yes, there's a lot going on in those comics.
Yeah. There sure was. We get into this kind of video game inspired action where on the run from Sentinels, Friends of Humanity show up and start shooting at them.
They walk very video gamey.
They do.
They like marching kind of. It's funny.
And we get an homage, pretty clear homage to the Matrix. We get the phone booth.
Oh, I loved it.
That's their way out of this scene, this zone, whatever.
Before we leave this scene though, there is a great moment here where Jubilee's like, "Aren't you even going to use your powers? Like we're in trouble." And he says there could be cameras or something to that effect. And it's a nice quick reminder of how the X-Men as a metaphor for whatever identity that you might have that alienates you from the mainstream, and how insane that can be. So especially for some reason, maybe it's because he's like a young hip guy, it struck me as like how young guys would be very afraid of being seen as gay.
100%.
And like the fact that the fear of that is so consuming that he like wouldn't even defend himself. I thought it's very quick. It's a blink and you miss it thing, but I think it's just a good reminder of how they always just sort of sprinkle this stuff in, where it's like this, like being a mutant kind of cripples you if you don't accept it.
And I think that not only is that a valid interpretation, I think much like certain scenes in like the X2 movie years ago,
yes.
It is. I think Sunspot is very intentionally written to be specifically like a metaphor for being a gay young man in the 90s.
That's true, because he, just like the whole idea of like telling his mom, it feels,
Right. And they give him this, heterosexual attraction with Jubilee. So they're not making him a gay character, but they're giving him the experiences of a gay character with his mutant status.
Yeah, it very much mirrors the Bobby Drake Iceman scene in X2.
Yeah.
When he has to tell his folks that he's a mutant. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And so I think that's very much intentional. Multiple episodes in this season. It's very clearly the intent of the writers, and it ought to be. I think that's a very valid connection to draw. So we get into, I think I mentioned earlier, but I just want to appreciate every time they show us kind of the pixel art versions of the characters. It makes me smile a little bit. I love pixel art. I've always enjoyed video games. And there's something about of that era, the like Super Nintendo-ish 16-bit looking era of pixel art that just really hits a very sweet spot for me just about every time.
I see what you're saying. Well, you had that great, maybe you still have it, the great Link. Here, take this, the key holder that I always smile at your.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my next to my door.
Yes.
Yeah, but what Brett's referencing is years ago, my wife, Tracy, she gave me a key holder, like a single hook key holder that's next to my door with a picture of the first cave in The Legend of Zelda from Nintendo, where it's saying, it's dangerous to go alone, take this.
Right.
And that's been always on my wall ever since she gave that to me more than a decade ago.
Back when I used to visit you guys in your tiny little apartment.
100%.
Hang out and watch movies together.
Yeah, we did.
I'd leave my rotten job and go hang out with you and forget the day.
Some of the fondest memories. All right. So they transition into this scene that's meant to be a level based on her Genosha experience from season 1 of the original animated series. And some of the same cameos are present. I think Blob, Sunfire, which is just a straight reference back. And they run into this mysterious figure who I can't remember if at this point, if you watch with captions on, which I do because I hate feeling like I've missed a line ever. I can't remember if they already show the name Abscissa, which meant nothing to me. I was not aware of this character in the comics. I guess if somebody had read that arc, they would know exactly what's happening. But I was like, I don't know, who is this? It's not Longshot.
I don't know who she is either, but we do get a great line from Jubilee where she calls her a hot topic stalker, which was also a very great 90s reference.
Very much so. Then we get the reveal that it's Mojo. Mojo's behind this.
And I wrote down here, when Mojo appears, Roberto says, "What in the name of all heaven is that?" And this is the correct response to seeing Mojo. It's either what in God's name is that, or you're violently vomiting. Those are the only two reactions to seeing Mojo.
Or to quote you talking about Professor X, hard as a rock.
I mean, I suppose there are some people that are intrigued by this horrible, disgusting character. But,
and could we say, like, Mojo kind of sucks. Like, I think there's a little more leeway in the books to have an okay time with Mojo. In the show, man, I don't know that we've ever had a good Mojo episode. It feels like it's a character with potential to be very funny, but the writing and the has never actually made that happen.
I feel like you have to like the very on-the-nose satire of what he is, where he's just this like craven producer who will just do anything to get ratings. And I mean, it's not an inaccurate satire, but it is. I mean, he's a disgusting monster. If you think about that in contrast to Magneto, Mr. Sinister, Apocalypse, like they're all very cool looking. They're all very serious. Although I guess Mr. Sinister in more recent runs of the comic is not as serious. He's a bit more catty and comical. But Mojo is, I like the Mojo world because I like this bizarre, insane world. Yes. But
it creates story potential.
I mean, but he even just has like the experience of going to this insane world. You know, it's very dystopian.
Agreed.
I enjoy that. But you're right. We've never gotten a great Mojo episode. I mean, there probably aren't even that many great Mojo issues in the comics, to be honest. But
probably not. But
I guess what it comes down to is I like the idea of Mojo World maybe better than it's ever been delivered.
And if we open up the X-Files.
Yes.
I think I remember reading the inspiration for it's just so on the nose. I think it was maybe Ann Nocenti was taking graduate classes in like production or something like that, and had been reading stuff by like Noam Chomsky, etc., about like the effects of mass media and television on people, and was just like, that will be a character now. And it's just this extremely on the nose, like, here's everything wrong with entertainment culture and what it's doing to people.
Very much the opiate of the masses mentality.
Absolutely. And I do think somewhere there's a way to write and voice Mojo that he's still just as detestable, but like genuinely a great time to watch and listen to. Like there's a way to do this where it's very funny, and they've never quite got there. And in hopes of that, I actually picked up, this is, I guess, a very recent X-File. It's called X-Men Black. Right. And it was like a 5 mini-issue thing focused on 5 stories of 5 villains. I only looked at the Mojo one so far, specifically because it was written by Scott Aukerman from Comedy Bang Bang.
Oh, wow.
And it was good. I was hoping to be like, finally, a hilarious Mojo that I really like hanging on every word. But I was like, oh, no, this is just like an enjoyable story. It's worth reading. It is funny, but it's not like funny.
I feel like Mojo's tough to make funny. Because he's just so disgusting. I feel like it's just hard to overcome that. Let's get into this guy in this one. He calls Jubilee a dirty girl. Disgusting.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, nasty.
He does say, I mean, this is a bit of an amen for me. He calls video games the future of my memory. I have nothing against video games. I played video games extensively as a child. But, I mean, now that you can literally play them all the time, I'm kind of what's the stupid internet thing? I'm kind of blackpilled against video games now because I feel like they're just slowly destroying kids' lives.
I'm gonna half agree with you because I think this episode has the unfortunate timing of being produced now but set in the 90s, where I feel like the time for that pointed criticism, yes, was the 90s, even into the aughts. But right now, I feel like if you're doing a Mojo story and you're doing it not set in the 90s, it's social media, right? It's this Mojo is Elon Musk now.
Well, I mean, and he kind of, I mean, not in terms of social media, but he does basically say like TV's dead, video games are the way of the future. But
we, the audience, like their video games they're still the present, but they're like old hat. We're used to them.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? They've basically won, right? Like as a kid, as a kid, you can play Fortnite on your computer, and then when your friends come over, you can play Fortnite on your Xbox on your TV, and then when you go to school, you can play Fortnite on your phone. You can play it all day long. Like, yeah. I mean, there were literally.
I've never played Fortnite.
No, neither, that came way after I was done playing video games. My video game.
I play video games, but I haven't played Fortnite.
My video game card where I played the most gaming was World of Warcraft, and there were literally stories of kids playing that for so long that they died. Like they just died at their desk because they just couldn't stop playing it. So,
oh gosh,
it is. I mean, in that way, right?
And this episode is in loving memory of all kids who ever died at their desk playing World of Warcraft.
Yeah, at the very, very end, there's a memoriam for them. Mojo cracks open a bottle of Code Red and pours it out.
Hey, can I say, before we get back into the meat of the episode, as far as Mojo goes, they've never connected. There's a lot of humor that I find, though, and I wish they had more. I want Major Domo. I like Major Domo's kind of like droll, sarcastic
he's the
presence near Mojo, yeah. And Spiral too. Spiral can be very entertaining.
He's sort of like Mojo's handler in a way, and he's very I forgot about him.
He's like his genteel robot butler or whatever he is.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point. Is you kind of need people to bounce off of him.
You do,
because if he's just there, he's just this disgusting disgusting guy. Speaking of disgusting guys.
Hey, I'm right here.
Skinny Mojo is even grosser than full-size Mojo.
Yeah.
Because this dude is sitting in a puddle of his own skin. There's one shot where it's kind of like looking down at him, and he's like sitting in a soup of loose skin. It's gross. This is a gross drawing of this character.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Everything about the design of the character, whether big or emaciated, like, is written to be like, see, isn't he gross?
Yeah, as like the manifestation of craven greed, I suppose.
Yeah,
is horrific. But I see, so like he has funny lines, like he mentions like the 18 to 45 age demographic. Like I think like things like that are kind of funny in that, like, I mean, he's just so craven, like you just have to kind of play into that.
Agreed. And this plan, I mean, my note is it's typical Mojo bullshit. Like it's what Mojo always shows up to do. He's going to trap some X-Men for the purposes of getting his ratings up.
And one thing I'll say that makes me like this episode more is it's very clearly a critique on nostalgia poisoning.
Agreed. And that's one of the things I do like about it. Yes.
And it's sort of kicked off here by Mojo, where he says, "This is the dream, Jubilee. Be young forever. Replay the golden hits. No growing up. Think about it, Jubes. The old X-Men are totally old school." And it shows like all the silly shows. He goes, "That's not X-Men." So like just this petulant idea of like always being the guy, like the kid in the basement playing video games, always watching the same movies over and over again, being very bitchy if things change in the sequel. It doesn't go whole hog with it, but it does have this nice idea of like, you just can't do this stuff all day long. Like you have to stop watching X-Men all the time.
So, spoken by two 40-ish-year-old guys on a podcast about an X-Men cartoon. I will say though that something that I agree, that's a good message and it's the right message. Like you got to live your life. You can't just live in the past and comforting old memories. Totally agree. Also, the setup to that, though, doesn't quite follow because it's like the inciting is it's her birthday and she's excited to like go have an exciting new experience and be older now. And it doesn't quite fit the message of like she wants to stay young. It's like, well, no, that doesn't seem like what she actually wanted. You know, it still works as a moral of the story.
It absolutely, you're right. It is because it is sort of like punishing her. Like she just turned 18 and she just wants to have fun at the mall. It's like she's not breaking some cardinal sin here.
No.
But you know what? I think, but it is well written enough that I don't mind it. I think it works really well.
Yeah. So moving forward, they get dumped back in the game, and I like we get the little Days of Future Past poster homage on the wall there. And I like it's very clearly a video game because they have a whole bunch of palette swap enemies that they fight. Like here's the purple Sentinel and the green Sentinel and the blue Sentinel.
Yeah.
A very video game conceit. And we do get a shot here that Spiral is still working for Mojo, and in fact, we get the impression that he's fired a lot of other people, so Spiral's having to do multiple people's jobs now.
I always like when we get shots of her. This was the original show as well. She's using all of her arms to like pull levers and push buttons. It's very funny. It's just the pinnacle of the overworked staff person.
Absolutely.
We also get so they go from Days of Future Past to the Savage Land.
Yes.
And the mysterious figure intercedes again. And Mojo starts talking about how you got to get the bug. You got to get this bug.
Yes.
And Spiral says, this is what you get when you kill tech support. I wrote, hey, that's my job. This is basically my job.
Yes, absolutely.
She's quality assurance.
Yep.
She's fighting the good fight in losing, as all QA people do.
And nine other things. And I guarantee you Mojo didn't give her a raise.
She's not getting paid well. No.
She's barely getting cost of living adjustments.
Let's get one thing straight here. Mojo does not do benefits.
No, not at all.
She is signed on not as an employee, but as a contractor. She is a contractor.
That's right.
Mojo slaughtered the unions long ago. There are no full-time employees. Everybody's on a contracting license. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare there for the population of people who just want to get through their life.
Oh my God, forget about it.
But then they end up here on Asteroid M.
They do, fighting evil video game boss character Magneto.
I really like how they change his voice to be very video game voice tone.
Like the arcade game.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I realized it would have been kind of a cheesy, very direct call out, but I was really hoping for him to drop an X-Men, welcome to die, like straight out of that game. But we get a fight that's like, okay. It's not a great boss fight.
It's very much like talking about the mechanics of games and how you have to figure out the mechanics of games. It's fine.
Yeah. And Sunspot, or excuse me, he's not Sunspot yet. Roberto kind of bites it, and someone places an extra life there for Jubilee to find and bring him back. And then this is about the time we get the reveal, right? That it's Abscissa is old Jubilee, or rather an old beta version bug of Jubilee that has survived all of Mojo's multiple tests of the game.
Before we do that, we do get a very funny exchange where Roberto's yelling at her in Portuguese, and she goes, I don't speak justifiably angry Portuguese.
That's true. That was not bad.
Funny line, and a great throwback to the comics when, one of the big things about X-Men was that it was an international team. So there was a lot of times when it'd be like, there'd be lines in Russian, there would be lines in Japanese or Spanish. And so I don't know if that's what they're referencing, but it made me think of that, and it shined a fond memory on those comics and how they really were globe-trotting, and I like that aspect of the comics.
It was. And looking back, it was like, for whatever character, like the same dozen words from the language that they would just trot out over and over to remind you. But it did, I will say, growing up as whatever middle-class white kid in the United States where, pre-internet / early internet, like it did actually give me the feeling like, oh, there is a bigger world. And people can be from different places and interact and all this stuff. Like, it did do what it set out to do. You could look back and say it's a little quaint or clumsy now, but it was effective. It did what it was trying to do.
Oh, absolutely. And it made the world feel so big in the comic. Like, it just gave it an epic feel that you weren't necessarily, like DC, so many of those stories are relegated to the cities that those heroes protect.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And certainly that happens in Marvel as well, Spider-Man in New York and various other things. But yeah, it really did give you the idea of this global mutant kind of movement. And also tied in like Peter was on like a collectivist farm in
Oh,
Russia in the
100%.
Soviet Union. So it also like introduced you to concepts about like global politics and stuff like that.
And it gave you this idea that there's good people from everywhere, right? There's heroes from everywhere. It's kind of this very small inoculation dose against xenophobia, right? Everyone else everywhere is bad people. It's like, no, there's good people from everywhere, right? As you say, here's Colossus. He was written at a time where it was very like anti-communist sentiment, and like, here's this heroic character,
Otherwise known as liberal indoctrination.
Oh, they got me.
They got you. Oh, they got you so good, you idiot. That's why you're the raging communist that I see before me.
That's definitely me. In all of our group texts, I'm the most communist. Yeah. So yeah, old Jubilee Abscissa, as we said, Mojo had to beta test the game, made a bunch of XPs of the characters, and this is the one who never died, who just kept surviving and has learned the game so well that now she's like a thorn in Mojo's side.
And what is this storyline that because I don't know this character at all. I don't know.
I had to look it up because like I watched this the first time I watched this. It said on the caption like Abscissa. Like, who's Abscissa? I don't know who this is. And like I guess it was a Mojo story, and it's a variant older Jubilee. And I don't know what issue it was. I don't know what year it's from. But I think the specifics might be slightly different. But the broad strokes, it's the same. It's Jubilee meets old Jubilee, who's been living in the Mojoverse.
And this costume is rad as hell.
It is.
I think that is. They make the costume look great, and when we get to the fight, the powers look really good.
Ghost Rider-esque.
Yeah, kind of, definitely. We get sort of the turn here where we introduced the problem, or not the problem, but the metaphor with Mojo where he's like, don't you want to stay here forever? Yeah. And we get this nice speech where she says, I know a part of you wants to hang here forever. You know how every stage ends. There's no surprises. There's no twist, but that's not what life is. And it's a nice little message that says you gotta not just live in video games and TV and nostalgia all the time. It's just not a way to go.
And she caps that speech with a little reference, a little shout out when she says, wow, Magneto was right. Just in a different context than that's usually spoken.
That's true. That's true. But video games are rad is the retort.
Yes, right. And then there's our fight with Mojo, and Abscissa, old Jubilee, shows off like a little peek at what Jubilee could actually be doing with her powers, including her fireworks Kienzan/Destructo disc. Looks like a Dragon Ball move where she cuts off the legs off Mojo's little spider tank. I don't know what do you call that thing?
I mean that's such a common mode of conveyance in sci-fi stuff. There's the spider. What the hell are those things called? The Spider Slayers are giant spider robots. In Wild Wild West, that terrible movie. There's that robotic spider at the end.
Spiders are nature's most terrifying predators.
Yes.
Folks, look up Kevin Smith talking about almost making the Superman movie. That's a good time to hear that story.
Oh, that was like one of the first things on the old internet, and we watched that a lot in college. Yeah, me and my geeky movie friends.
Same.
Even like the prequel Star Wars movies have a lot of spider crab like creatures. Yeah. For some reason, it's a go-to creepy robot that is in the science fiction zeitgeist.
Well, you know what? Art imitates life. In nature, there's a phenomenon, was it called like carcinization, something like that, where basically the shape and movement style of a crab has independently evolved in like 5 or 6 different major branches of like undersea animals. Like they keep evolving into a crab shape because it's effective.
I think I've read of that. Yeah. And we're all going to eventually be crabs. Can't wait for it. Yeah. I prefer life as a crab. It's what we have now. One other thing about Jubilee's powers that's totally awesome is... Yeah. She can like make skates out of light on her feet. Yes. So she's like skating across the screen.
I like it.
Very cool. And again, another way to just make the action more dynamic, use the character's powers in ways you weren't expecting.
And I like that these are permanent upgrades. I mean, later towards the end of the season, we see like she retains this. It's a permanent level up on her powers. Like it's not just like that was for this episode and now it's forgotten.
Yes, because a lot of times that was what would happen with shows back in the day. 100%. Is it would be a one-off, but then it would never come back. They'd get a job for that one episode, but then what happened the next episode, they have the real job back.
Womp womp.
And speaking of unique things in this episode, last episode we talked about the cool visual powers, the colors.
Yep.
And we have that here with Jubilee. That pink, yellow, and baby blue
100%.
Combination is very cool. It gives it a very 80s, like neon vibe that I like quite a bit. I almost wish we got a bit more of it. You know, we do spend a lot of time going to the different levels, but I wish we just saw a little bit more of them in this video game sort of astral plane where
I
it's like
do.
geometry shapes and stuff like that. I really dig that design.
Yeah, I like that too. But yeah, they beat Mojo. They get zapped back out, and they get a little makeout time.
Yeah, and we get this great shot of them. There's like soft lighting and the sparkles are going around them. It's a nice little end to that scene. And
Yeah, like
it's a reference to the speech where she says you got to take like risks or you have to live dangerously or something like that. And Roberto mentions that line and then she kisses him. It's a nice way to just wrap up that whole episode.
it is. And so that kind of brings this first piece of the episode to a close. And I'll say it's not perfect. It's hard to do a good Mojo episode, but like it's a good time. There's plenty of things to like in this episode.
Well, it lets me know. Actually, it makes me kind of wish for a world wherein we could have what we have with the show, which is these overarching stories. But I
Yes.
almost wish we could have like a parallel show that's like these are all one-offs. Like maybe there's like the characters carry over and like their power-ups carry over and all
Yeah.
that happens. But the stories are largely just one-offs because I have a very
You want the
fond
X-Files, the actual X-Files, not just our dumb joke.
X-Files, like I said, Twilight Zone, like that's one of
Oh,
the things that I
yeah,
love about Twilight
sure.
Zone is just it just alters radically from episode to episode. Even genre, it could be a horror and then sci-fi and
Yeah,
something else. So I really like the unpredictability of a week by week show.
I
And
entirely agree.
you totally get that from this segment. And
Yep.
I would love if we had a world where we could have both, but
Yeah,
beggars can't
me
be
too.
choosers, I suppose.
Maybe season 2. We'll see.
Well, it's going to be all apocalypse. That guy's going to take over the whole thing.
Maybe
We'll
they'll
get to
give
that when we
more
get to it.
episodes this time. We'll see.
Well, when we do our recap show at the end of all this, I'll share my very pessimistic feelings about where we're going.
Fair enough. So let's transition into Life Death Part 1, which when I saw that was the title, I was excited.
Yep.
Because I mean you've referenced it before. There's this pretty iconic comics piece with it that's really a very moving, right, characters with Storm and Forge, and I feel like what we got here was kind of a pale reflection of that.
Yeah. I wish I actually don't even own that issue. I don't have the collection that has it. The first time I ever read it was I borrowed an omnibus from the library, and they had the black and white one. So I read it in black and white. Oh, not black and
okay.
white, but they sell cheaper versions of the books that don't have colors. They're
Yeah.
just the drawings.
No, yeah, I know the ones you're talking about.
And I mean, it allows Barry Windsor-Smith's incredible art to really soar when you read it that way. But some of the differences, or one of the main differences, is that this takes place in the cartoon. It takes place in the log cabin. In the issue, it takes place in like the building that Forge built. And so
Yes.
doing all this really cool stuff where it's changing as they go through it, and he's sort of showing off all the stuff that he invented. And it just creates a very cool setting for that story to take place. And also, as if anybody that listens to this knows, anytime you give very talented people a chance to just be sort of needlessly talented and just throw a bunch of ideas out there, I'm always going to be a sucker for it. And that's what that does. It just lets a very talented artist say, like, oh, it'd be really cool if instead of steps here, it was just a bunch of moving platforms and it moved them around the room and it showed them different things. But yeah,
So
go ahead.
let me jump into this episode and say they're sitting down to dinner, and clearly there's romantic sparks between them. But like, what a fucking risk to have a chili date early on in the relationship!
I
My
never thought
God,
of that.
the
And you know what?
brass to do that.
Not only the cojones to have a bison chili dinner for a date, that date is wearing white overalls.
You're not kidding. And how many bathrooms do you think that log cabin has? Like, there's
Not enough.
This is setting up some early issues in their relationship.
And you know what? It's a cabin in the 90s. And
Oh my
so
God.
they might not even have a septic tank, right? Because this is like out there in the woods. Who knows the plumbing situation?
That's true. Oh, so
Scary-
yeah, Forge
scary
taking
stuff. That's the
taking a
real-
hell of a risk.
Listen, Forge, as this episode shows, is a bold guy.
He is a bold guy.
He takes some swings. He is into Storm, and he lets her know.
Yeah, a little. We'll get there. A little too much, and I think that's an episode pacing problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So let's. I'm actually gonna take the reins here and talk
Go.
about how I first saw this, and I felt it was disjointed, but I couldn't figure out how. And then I watched this episode twice today because I was like losing my mind at how this episode or the segment is edited.
Yeah.
So we get nice conversations. We talk about how Forge's powers work and how his mind kind of is working all the time to figure things out. We get a chat about how Storm is mourning about not being able to fly. But if you watch this first sequence play out, we get the establishing shot of the cabin, and it's clearly like dusk. It's light outside, but it is getting dark. We go inside, and behind Forge is a window, and it is clearly nighttime. It is dark. They have candles. There's no electricity, so that does not bode well for the bathroom situation. There are stars in the sky, and he says, "Let's go. Let's go for a ride." They're riding horses, and it is clearly the middle of the day. It is noon.
Yeah.
So either they royally fucked up coloring the time of day, or this episode was just so rammed they had to like throw scenes on top of other scenes and like stitch it together.
I think that's it.
Because there were a lot of, also if you notice, there's a lot of like ADR work in this where Forge is saying something while we're looking at Storm.
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like they're like, shit, we have to transition this to the horse riding scene. Just have that guy come back and say something that he didn't originally say, and we don't have to worry about matching the speed with his mouth moving, the animation. And we're just going to try and stitch this together because that happens throughout the episode where we're not showing Forge and he's speaking. And kids, if you know anything about movies, whenever that's happening, whenever there's a voiceover or we hear a character say something but we don't see their mouth moving, that was probably recorded after the fact because they didn't like a take, or a scene didn't work, or they had to cut a scene and so they had to kind of like work around it with an overdubbing them somehow. And that's throughout this segment. And I would really like to get an oral history of what went wrong with Lifedeath, because they clearly just had to cut this thing up and stitch it back together again.
It's stripped to the bones. It's stripped to the bones, which sucks because I love these characters. I mean, Storm's one of the greatest characters in all superhero media, all comics. She looks great in this. Her design with this, her outfit, her hair, like she looks great. But it's it's just so condensed, and it feels kind of chopped apart and taped together in a way where there's a version of this that plays out over time that's really, really nice. And instead we get something that's like, oh, I see what it could have been.
And we get that here where they're in his workshop. This is after the horse riding scene, where we get a reference to the owl, which is they don't do a great job of sort of building the tension towards this thing coming there, but this is one of the examples of that. We see in his workshop the pinup of his team, which is a nice little Easter egg. But the moment that's really nice is before Storm goes into the machine, she takes this very deep, nervous breath.
Yeah, and she has a little bit of sweat when she's in it too.
And it's just like those little touches that show like these people know how to tell a story. They just got fucked over. And it's a real shame.
And I do like, because there were so many times I feel like in the original series where it's like, it really beats you over the head with, hey, this is Storm and she has claustrophobia. She doesn't but this is like, you're right. It's a little breath. It's a little bit of an expression, a little beat of sweat maybe, where it's like, yes, this is uncomfortable for her to be in this machine, but we're not going to beat you over the head with it.
And it's also just a moment of like, this could bring your powers back, or it could not, and you're gonna feel like your powers are never coming back. So it's like this massive moment, and they don't have the runway to set it up, but they do just have a great voice actor, and they give her a moment to just do this breath that just kind of does all the acting in storytelling that just sort of isn't allowed to happen.
Great credit always to Storm's voice actress. I think Alison Seeley Smith is her name. She's never kind of not killed it with this character.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And she gets a chance to really, when she tries her powers, she has this very dramatic, like, please, winds, hear me. And she has like this defeated pleading of like, please. But yeah, she's almost so good that it kind of hurts the episode. Because it's like, because we haven't had the time to sit with her not having her powers, we haven't had time to sit with her and Forge developing this relationship, it almost feels like overacting. But but what it is great acting without a great story around it. She's trying her damnedest. And I forgive me, I didn't write down the guy who did Forge's voice. He's doing a great job as well. But they're just let down by I assume the script was on point, but just the editing process and how they had to fit all this together.
I wrote down, speaking of like her performance, a line that I just like really loved the delivery on was a perfect path to your redemption. Like she delivered that so well when she's like calling Forge out.
Yeah, and before we get there, the scene where she tries her powers, they don't work, and
Yeah.
he comforts her.
Yeah.
Gorgeous shot of them on the deck with the moon in the background.
Yes.
Like again,
Yes.
like I don't know even know if you call cinematography with the animation, but when they're always delivering as best as they can, even under what are clearly not
Yeah.
ideal circumstances,
A,
we
a
still get
visual
a
spectacle. Yeah.
we still get a lot of great visual stuff in this
We
episode.
do. Yeah. I completely agree with that. So yeah, you're right. We did jump ahead with that, but then she finds out he's the one responsible for the initial prototypes of inhibitor technology. It's his fault that she lost her powers indirectly.
We do get a line. He says a scientist in Scotland is the one that took his research and made it
Yeah.
into something more. Is that
Is that
Moira?
Moira? It could be. It
Because
could be.
it could be, but in the original X-Men show, if you remember, there's a scientist in Scotland who is
Oh,
actually Apocalypse.
Dr. Adler, something like that?
Yes,
Yep.
he's the one that takes away Rogue's power. Well, he's going to take away Rogue's powers,
Right.
but it's actually
He does
Apocalypse.
take away Angel's powers.
Well, it's
Well,
he's
and
using
he
this as a cover to gather his four horsemen.
exactly. So yeah, maybe that is exactly who it was. That's a good call, Brett. So yeah, so Storm is justifiably upset by this, and God, the pacing on this is what just murders this. But when he says he loves her, and it's like, why? You've spent
Yeah.
half an episode together.
Yeah. There is a great line here where she says to him, "You of all should know the perils of trusting those in Washington." And
Yes.
it's a pretty
Oh, I did
weighty
like that.
line because not only is this dude, an indigenous person, he's
Yes.
also a vet from Vietnam. So
Oh,
it's just like,
100%. Doubly.
so
Yes.
again, in a better, I don't even want to call it a better episode because it almost feels like I'm coming down on the creators and it's clearly not their fault
It's
at all.
not that. It's not their fault.
You
It's
could you could play out those flashbacks because in the comic book, I mean, it's full of and whenever we meet Forge, it's like a flashback to Vietnam and not letting his people down. And so that line would have even more weight if we would just let this story play out, let his backstory play out a little bit more.
agreed. Do you remember? I'm sure they say in the books which of the nations Forge is from.
That I
Is it
don't
Cherokee
know.
Navajo? I don't remember what. I'm sure they must say it in the books.
Cherokee sounds familiar, but then again, I have watched a lot of cowboy movies in my life, and the
Yeah.
Cherokee are always the ones who are the bad ones.
Well, but okay, he's not the bad one though. I mean,
Oh, sure, yeah.
Storm's mad at him, but he's not an evil person.
No, yeah, and it again, it is a nice conflict to have here between the two of them, but just not given nearly enough time to bake in the
Yeah,
oven.
absolutely.
Well, we just transitioned to a great. She's riding through the rain, and we get this great. It's like a purple and green background as
Yeah.
the lightning is flashing. It's very nightmarish,
Hmm.
very surreal. The music here is very good as well. And again, it's another thing where it's like this team is just going for it. They're just trying to do everything
Yeah.
they can to make
Yes.
this work and make it make sense. But
Yep.
unfortunately, she falls off the horse, falls through the roof. It has this great like what's going on, bizarre, surreal, Twilight Zoney. This is not what you think it is. Would have been really cool if we had a full episode where like that was happening little by little, and then this is
Yes.
like the big reveal.
Agreed.
But not meant to be. We do get a great line from Forge where he says, "Get out of my home, you damn demon."
Well, and I wanted to bring this line up because I think there's something in the delivery of that it almost felt like like he knows this demon, but he's kind of
Yes.
like a pest on the porch,
Yes.
he's shooing away a
Yes.
possum. Go on, get out of here, you.
It's the those goddamn raccoons messing with my trash again. Like
Yeah.
this guy's trying to shoo this demon away because it is a
Right. I wanted him to be either more horrified because he's never seen this thing before, or like horrified because he knows all too well. Like he realizes now. But no, you're right. It's get out of my trash can.
this dude delivers this line like he should have a goddamn broom in his hand when he says it.
Yes,
You know what I
100%.
It doesn't match what we're seeing, which is a demonic,
Being.
not even
Owl
person,
being.
juggernaut-sized carnivorous owl.
Yes.
It is. There's blood dripping from its beak. It
No, that's
bites him.
Tootsie Pop, Brett. That's Tootsie
No,
Pop.
it has. Yeah, it licked it 3 times.
He never made it without biting Forge.
That's true. But God damn it, this line. Damn you.
It made me laugh, not for the reason they wanted it to, but it gave me a good chuckle.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it also it is not helped by the fact that it comes out of absolutely nowhere.
And I think now, Brett, you've read I think Lifedeath more times than I have. In the comics version, aren't they like kind of like out of time's flow? Like they're there for months or years or something like that together. It's like the implication is like time passes for them in a way that it's not happening in like the actual timeline, a time stream, whatever.
Yeah, I believe there's a Forge invention where they go into a special room, or maybe it's the entire place, the entire
Because
apartment.
they're stuck there. They can't leave this like pocket dimension, whatever.
It has a cool Sandman, like Neil Gaiman-esque Sandman feel to
Yes.
it, where it's like
Yes.
they are in just like you said, like a pocket world where it's sort of like the outside world doesn't exist for them, which again is really the art kind of plays into that a lot, and
Right.
it does what you kind of wish this episode did was, even though it's only like 2 issues, that I think Life Death is only 2 issues,
Yeah.
it feels like they've really had a lot of conversations and like it's really played out.
Yes. Whereas this, it feels like this is still their first date. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's just, and even man, even like the fade outs, which could work,
Yeah.
just make it feel really just like elliptical and not making a ton of sense.
Yeah. I will give a shout out. I like the design of the adversary. I think he's
Oh, yeah.
effectively creepy looking. Yep.
In the final shot of it, when we're in sort of the adversary's realm, we're in like a pool of blood.
Yeah.
It feels like something that you would see from a comic, where it's just like we're designing and coming up with a really cool, almost demonic realm.
Yes.
And it's just, it looks great. Alison Seeley Smith also does the voice of the adversary. So Storm,
Oh, okay.
she's doubling as both of their voices, which I think is a nice touch.
That's fitting.
And even if Storm was like hearing voices throughout this, right, and you thought it was her, but it turned out to be the adversary, that would be a cool touch. That would help telegraph this a little bit more.
So yeah, I think this was like a small dusting of what could have been a great thing spaced out over several episodes. Little hints, like you said, with the Xavier Magneto stuff from season 2 of the original, and it just feels really crammed together in a way that hurts it because it could have been magic.
I mean, that's the thing, is it could have, when you see just again the art and the writing and the voice acting, it's like, yeah, if they got another episode, even one more episode, right, they could have really done this justice. But I think one of the reasons, or one of the things that really handcuffed them in terms of not being able to sprinkle this throughout other episodes, is that I think they were afraid that it would take away from those episodes. Because next episode,
Yeah.
shit
Oh,
hits
we
the
are
fan.
off to the races next, and we don't
And-
stop until the season ends.
And
We are
we're-
off to the races.
Yeah, and it's in the episode, especially the next one, which we'll talk about when we talk about it, is dealing with such emotional stuff and just such
Oh, you're
heavy
not
stuff
kidding.
that
You're not
I
kidding.
can understand, like, we can't do what we're gonna do and then tack on, 5, even if those 2 to 5 minutes are really well done, it kind of detracts from what this other episode is, and you got to keep that episode in its own world by itself. And then once that happens, it's almost like there's too much momentum to fit in these 2 to 5 minute clips of it.
You're
So
not wrong
they're
about
almost they're almost, I mean,
They would need to be at the end of the one-off episodes that you were wishing
Exactly.
we had. Yeah,
Exactly.
Like that's kind of what this was, but it feels anomalous instead of just like part of the pacing is we do one-offs, we do plot movement, we do one-offs, we do plot movement. This felt more anomalous.
Yeah, that's a great word for it. It just doesn't fit into the rhythm of anything, unfortunately. But you just, even at their height, I can't knock this team for being too ambitious, because we really
Their low point here is still fine. There's still plenty to like about it.
Oh yeah, at no point do they ever really drop the ball. It's just too well done to say that.
Yeah.
Can't in good faith say that about the show. Did you want to open up that X-Files
Let's do it.
and talk to us a little bit about the video games?
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll play the game, the not a video game that I put together for you. So yeah, I think I have continued to be and have been in my life more of a gamer than you, Brett. And given that the X-Men were such like an obsession for me for several years of my younger life, I was so desperate for there to be good X-Men video games. And it wasn't zero, but it was kind of sparse.
Oh yeah, we never really got, and to this day, still don't have a singular, like, yes, the way that those Batman games and those Spider-Man games exist now. Like those
Yeah.
fans can point to those games and say these are the definitive games for these people. Some people even say that those Spider-Man games are like the best Spider-Man thing ever made.
The recent ones, the PS4, PS5 ones?
Yeah,
Because those are, yeah, I haven't played most of Miles Morales or the second one, but like that's a great game.
and it is kind of a sequel to it, the second one.
Yeah.
So like I have my brother and my other friend who's a big comic book guy, big video game guy. Both of them are like, this is probably better than all of the movies.
There's, you know what? Let's put that statement in bounds. It is certainly, I think, a valid take. I haven't decided if I agree with it, but I might. So yeah, so I remember, being younger. We both remember the X-Men arcade game,
Of course.
and it coming out when it did, and us. I mean, my first real dive into X was this show. I remember seeing that game and being like, why are these the characters? There's Cyclops, there's Wolverine, got him. There's Storm, great. Okay, Nightcrawler. I know who Nightcrawler. I know who Colossus are. We've seen them a little bit. And then who is Dazzler? Who is what is this Jubilee with a different name? And like it was of an era. And I've learned since that it was meant to be a tie-in with that pilot, the Pride of the X-Men pilot episode, and that makes everything make a lot of sense.
Because Wolverine also has his brown and yellow costume in that, and Cyclops has the cap. So
yes,
it's an older school costume still, yes.
Which the game, I mean, going back, there's a lot to like about it as an arcade beat 'em up. The gameplay gets very repetitive, and it is meant to suck quarters the way that using powers drains your life.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating because it means disincentivizes using the powers, which should be the thing that you get to do. And it's like, why do you want to be an X-Men? Because they have cool powers. Like, let me use their powers more. But yeah, so that one, and then I remember borrowing from wherever, Valley Shore Video or Blockbuster, wherever I borrowed it from, the X-Men Mutant Apocalypse for the Super Nintendo, which was a decent, like, Capcom stage, beat 'em up kind of game. I enjoyed that. But I think for years, and maybe to this day, the X-Men's like greatest video game outings have been in the fighters, specifically the one that starts with the X-Men fighting game and then gets into crossovers. And by the time we get to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I just consider that kind of a pinnacle of that 2D sprite-based fighting games. And it is loaded with X-Men. The Marvel side of the roster is like 70% X-Men characters, and it's great. The breadth of characters that we get, it's just a great game to play. It is in contention for the best video game X-Men. Although I will give a shout out to, I think it was on the PS2, the first one. There was the X-Men Legends games that was kind of a top-down RPG elements to it, and that was a pretty good one too. But there's a lot else. The Genesis platformers were good. I didn't have a Genesis, but I played at people's houses. But then there's a lot of clunkers or forgettable X-Men games.
So I played that 93 X-Men game that you're talking about for Sega. And that was really the extent of my X-Men video game playing. There was one, I can't find it now. Do you remember the guy, the enemy's name, Arcade?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about Arcade's Revenge, the Spider-Man X-Men crossover game.
Arcade's Revenge. That's what
I had that, and I played that a lot. That was a hard game, and some levels were not well made, but I played that so much. Credit to it for having fairly fluid sprite animation.
That was back in the day when, I mean, now I look back, I'm like, could those games really have been as hard as they were, or was I just a kid that was terrible at games? A lot of those games, because of the limitation of making games, and also because
stiff controls, etc.
But also, I just feel like the art of making games wasn't there yet. So it was just a bunch of guys being like, we got to get this, like, a bunch of big guys on stools with cigarettes hanging from their mouths being like, we got to get this game out there. And just not even really thinking about, can a 10-year-old beat this game? And just slapping it into a cartridge and setting it in the stores.
And I think that one, I don't think there was a way to say, I think maybe there was a pass. You couldn't save your progress. So every time at doing that Spider-Man intro level where you have to knock out the security cameras or whatever it is, the same exact route, the same pattern, like every time you wanted to play that game. Yeah. So that was one. So I have prepared, Bret, as a way to close us out, a little game where, as I said, the history of X-Men video games is full of forgettable, some of them outright clunkers. And a lot of them, though, have some decent subtitles in the names. So I can't take credit. I didn't remember all of these. I absolutely looked up a list of real subtitles to X-Men games. And also I've generated lists of fake subtitles for X-Men games. And so the game is, I'm going to just name a few, and you are going to try to guess if it is genuine or a deception.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So we'll start with, let's do one we'll start with a low and slow. Arcade's Revenge.
Genuine.
Absolutely. We just talked about it. Clone Wars.
So I know about this because it is the sequel to the one that I played a lot, so it is genuine.
100%.
Which is
X-Men 2
insane.
Clone Wars.
Which is insane because a couple of years later, George Lucas would name Episode 2 Clone Wars, and it would get. Do you know the story about how? Oh damn it! What's his name? Who's the guy that played Obi-Wan?
Sir Alec Guinness. Oh, Ewan McGregor.
Do you know the story of Ewan McGregor hearing that title for the first time?
If I've heard it, I've forgotten it.
He was at some sort of like press junket. And if you remember at the time, like those scripts and that stuff was like very under lock and key, trying not to let people know what those movies were about. And
Top
so he
secret.
didn't even know. He didn't even know what the name of the movie was. He just knew it was, Episode 5. And somebody said to him, "Oh, the title is Clone Wars," and he burst out laughing in the conference.
That's an appropriate reaction.
That movie's terrible.
Works better as a Genesis sequel title for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Extreme Mission.
Oh God, I'm gonna say false.
Correct. That is false. That is entirely made up. Sinister.
I mean, it's cheap and lazy, so it would be a video game subtitle. I'm gonna say genuine.
That one's fake.
Oh,
yep.
Got me.
Reign of Apocalypse.
Genuine.
Genuine. Correct.
Ooh, is that a newer one?
Somewhat, I think. So there's a big gap where, like, I think 2014 maybe was where the list ended. Like there haven't been X-Men games in a while. I think there is one that's on maybe the same company as the Spider-Man's games, like on their like future plans lists, but not for several years from now. But there's been a big drop off. Part of probably Marvel's like, let's not acknowledge the X-Men because we didn't have the movie rights to them for a while.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Mojo World.
Oh, that's genuine. That's a real one.
That was for the Game Gear, I believe. Mutants Teach Typing.
You know, I'm going to say genuine.
I wish.
Oh,
I wish it was.
It would be like a kid's game where they help you.
That's what I was going for.
That's another thing that if there are any kids listening to this, back in school they used to have typing classes because you didn't use computers enough that you would learn how to type. So they actually had classes that taught you how to type.
Big time.
That is no longer necessary because everybody's typing all the time.
The Fall of the Mutants.
Ooh, it's definitely a comic book. I'm going to say false.
Oh, that's a real one. It's an early one. It was like a PC game or Commodore or something like that. Wolverine's Hair Salon.
False.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I played that Wolverine game. It was not good.
The Super Nintendo one?
No, it was for, I think, PlayStation 1 or 2.
Oh, okay. A later one.
Mark Hamill does the voice of Wolverine in it. And it is not a good game.
Oh,
yeah.
Poor Mark Hamill. Versus Street Fighter.
True. No, genuine.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Destiny.
Genuine.
Yes, genuine.
Is this one of those computer phone ones?
It could be. I hadn't heard of it before I looked up this list. X Factor Investigations.
False.
False. Hentai Rhythm Puzzle Adventure Mystique.
I mean, I know you're probably expecting me to say false, but that's definitely it's probably not a licensed game, but it is a genuine game somewhere in the world.
I'll grant you that. It's never one that's come out officially, but sure, somebody's made that in Flash or something.
If you have a VPN in time, you can find that on the dark web.
Probably. And Mutant League Football.
That was a game.
Yeah, this is a trick question. It's not an X-Men game, but that's the genuine name of a Nintendo game.
Me and my brother Scott played that game constantly. And there was a Saturday morning cartoon tie-in to that.
Was there? I didn't know that.
Oh, this is in the day when the kinds of cartoons that they were slopping onto the Saturday morning plate. It was like these guys were mutants and they played sports. I don't know if there was a real story or plot to it, but they would hit each other and like body parts would fall off.
Oh, wow.
Bizarre stuff.
Yeah, right?
Bizarre stuff.
All right. And we could keep going, but I think we've kind of wrung as much out of that as we're going to. So it's probably time to call it. That was Motendo and Lifedeath Part 1. And now I think it's time for us to say that we will see you next time.
No, we did that terribly.
That's okay. It's the thought that counts.
We'll figure it out at some point. Before the end of the season, surely.
Our theme song was written and recorded by Cheer Captain. Find Cheer Captain at cheercaptain.bandcamp.com. To contact Matt or Bret, email us at manchildrenoftheatom@gmail.com.